Here are my picks for the player of last week. Matt Ryan threw for 448 yards and 3 touchdowns. Le'Veon Bell silenced my doubt with 109 rushing yards, 88 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown. Calvin Johnson looked like himself with 164 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Julius Thomas outperformed all tight ends with 104 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Houston allowed 6 points, had 2 fumble recoveries and 2 interceptions, and 1 was returned for a touchdown. These are my predictions for Player of the Week. In Andy Dalton's last 6 starts after throwing for 300 yards, in the previous game he averages 315 yards and more than 2 touchdowns. Arian Foster is going up against an Oakland defense that allowed the most rushing yards in Week 1. Demaryius Thomas has had over 100 yards in his last 3 games against Kansas City, and in his last 2 games against them he has a touchdown of over 70 yards. Jimmy Graham and the New Orleans Saints could be in for a shootout against Cleveland since they allowed the 2 most passing yards last week. Look for Houston to rush Oakland's rookie quarterback Derek Carr. Here are some possible free agents to add to your team. Kelvin Benjamin looked like Carolina's #1 receiver with 92 yards and 1 touchdown. Allen Hurns had a surprising day with 110 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jake Locker had an efficient day with 266 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. Marcus Wheaton may be Pittsburgh's #2 receiving option after a 97-yard game. Justin Forsett looks to be Baltimore's #1 rushing option after a 70-yard rushing day with 1 touchdown. Here are some players to watch. Robert Griffin III will be looking to have a bounce-back week. Justin Forsett may continue to get the majority of Baltimore's carries and is going up against a Pittsburgh defense that allowed 183 yards rushing last week. Percy Harvin was used in an array of ways in Seattle's offense last week. Zach Ertz could get more targets against an Indianapolis defense that gave up 100 yards and 3 touchdowns to a tight end last week. Carolina's formidable defense is going up against Detroit's explosive offense. Here's some reliable options for this week. Since joining Denver, Peyton Manning averages 328 yards and 2.75 touchdowns in his 4 games against Kansas City. Adrian Peterson is going up against a New England defense that allowed 191 yards rushing in Week 1. AJ Green had the 2nd most receiving yards in Week 1 and is going up against an Atlanta defense that allowed the 7th most receiving yards last season. Arizona is going up against a New York Giant offense that had 197 yards of total offense. Here are some sleepers to consider starting this week. In Carson Palmer's last 10 starts, he averages 283 yards passing and more than 2 touchdowns. Mark Ingram may be New Orleans' #1 red zone rushing option. Michael Floyd looks to be Arizona's #1 receiving option. Larry Donnell had the most receiving targets for the New York Giants in Week 1. St. Louis looks to have a bounce-back game against a questionable Tampa Bay offense. These players have a chance of having a big game. Drew Brees is going up against a Cleveland defense that allowed 363 yards passing in Week 1. Giovanni Bernard is going up against an Atlanta defense that allowed the 2nd most rushing yards last season. Reggie Wayne is going up against the Philadelphia secondary that allowed the most receiving yards last season. Rob Gronkowski had only 4 receptions from his 11 targets in Week 1. This could improve this week. Houston's pass rush could lead to turnovers from Oakland's quarterback Derek Carr. Phillip Rivers is facing a Seattle defense that has allowed a turnover in 19 of its last 20 games. Doug Martin is questionable with a leg injury and is going up against a tough St. Louis defense. Larry Fitzgerald had 4 targets and 1 reception in Week 1. Ladarius Green had 2 targets in Week 1. Cincinnati is going up against an Atlanta offense that threw for the most yards last week. Here are some players to consider putting in your starting lineup. Colin Kaepernick looks more comfortable in this offense with his new receiving options. Alfred Morris averaged 7 yards per carry last week and may see more because of that. Kendall Wright is going up against a questionable Dallas defense and is Tennessee's #1 receiving option. Martellus Bennett could be the beneficiary of Chicago's high-volume passing offense. Tampa Bay is going up against a St. Louis offense that looks to be scrambling for ways to score. Here are some players to consider keeping on your bench this week. Jay Cutler is coming off of a 4-turnover game. Zach Stacy will probably be facing the majority of Tampa Bay's defensive attention. Keenan Allen is going against a tough Seattle secondary. Kyle Rudolph looks to be more of a boom or bust type player. Minnesota is going up against a New England offense that should be looking to improve their performance from last week.